Hello guys, my name is Naluch Kwemeka and I welcome you guys to another tutorial section on Introduction to Logic. So in this session we'll be discussing on types of arguments. On our previous video we discussed what logic entails, the subject matter of logic, which is actually argument, and the component of argument, which entails inference, proposition, premise, and argument. We also went further to discuss premise indicators and conclusion indicators. So today we'll be talking about types of argument. So just to recap on what an argument is, I said in the last video that an argument is a set of propositions of which one is claimed to follow from the others, which is regarded as the basis or ground for accepting the truth of the very first one. What this simply means is that for there to be something called an argument, there have to be two or more propositions. Just a proposition cannot make an argument. So in logic, we have types of arguments. So is either we argue inductively or we argue deductively. In essence, the two types of arguments we have are: one, deductive arguments, and two, we have inductive arguments. So let me say this here. Aristotle, who is the father of logic, invented a way of doing logic, and that way enjoyed widely accepted favor until the modern period, where we have scholars like Bertrand Russell, Alfred North Whitehead, Ivan Copy, right? And they kind of criticize Aristotle's work. So in this video, I'm going to give you the meaning of deductive argument according to classical Aristotelian logic, and the meaning of inductive argument according to classical Aristotelian logic, and also according to the modern logician. So let's go. Inductive argument, according to classical Aristotelian logic, is an argument. Deductive argument, this one is according to Aristotelian logic. Deductive argument, according to classical Aristotelian logic. Aristotelian logic is one which starts with a general premise, a general proposition as a premise, and ends with a particular proposition as what? As the conclusion. So this is very simple. That means deductive argument, according to classical Aristotelian logic, is an argument which starts with a general proposition as a premise. That means the premise has a universal implication. Then it moves from the general premise towards a particular proposition as a conclusion. So I'm going to give an example of deductive argument. So let's look at the example of deductive argument according to classical Aristotelian logic. Forget, if I say all men are mortals, then I say Prespor is a man, therefore Prespor is a mortal. Now, an example. This is a typical example of a deductive argument according to classical Aristotelian logic, because it moved from a general proposition to a particular conclusion. So it starts with the general proposition as the premise of the argument, then it moves down to a particular proposition as the conclusion of the argument. So that is what deductive argument according to classical Aristotelian logic entails. Move from the general to the particular. So it can formulate argument using this form that is being stated here. Now, modern logicians find an issue with this. They are saying that it is not necessary that a deductive argument will have to start with a general proposition as a premise. That is, it's not necessary it has to start with a general premise and end with a particular premise. They are saying that a deductive argument can start with a general premise and also ends with a general conclusion. It can also start with a particular conclusion and also end with a particular conclusion, provided that the premises of the argument provide conclusive ground for accepting the conclusion of the argument. So according to deductive to modern logicians, a deductive argument is an argument in which the premises of the argument provides a conclusive ground for accepting the conclusion of an argument. I'm going to write it on the board for clarity's sake. A deductive argument, according to modern logician, is an argument in which the premises provides a conclusive ground for accepting the conclusion of an argument. So that is, a deductive argument does not necessarily have to start with a general premise. All right, it can start with a general premise, it can start with a particular premise, providing that the premises of that argument provide a conclusive ground. So this is what they mean by this. Now, supposing that I said, for example, that a bachelor is an unmarried man, right? Then the second one, and I say that Emeka is a bachelor. Therefore, Emeka is an unmarried man. Now, this is an example of a deductive argument which starts from a general premise. We start with a particular premise to a particular conclusion, and it's still deductive. So it's not necessarily that a deductive argument have to start with a general premise to a particular conclusion, right? A bachelor is an unmarried man, Emeka is a bachelor, and Emeka is an unmarried man. So these are typically an example of a deductive argument with particular propositions throughout. Now, another way you can define a deductive argument is that it's an argument in which the conclusion is necessarily derived from the premises. Emeka is an unmarried man is derived from the premise 1 and premise 2 given. Bachelor is an unmarried man is already stated. And Emeka is a bachelor. So if a bachelor is an unmarried man and Emeka is a bachelor, definitely Emeka has to be an unmarried man. So the conclusion of this argument is necessarily derived. It followed from the premises given in this argument. So that is what a deductive argument entails according to modern logicians. Alright guys, so the example I gave earlier is for a deductive argument which moved from a particular premise to a particular conclusion. I see deductive. So I'm going to give an example of a deductive argument that also moved from a general premise to also a general conclusion. That is, the problem here that the modern logicians are having with the classical definition of deductive argument, that it is not necessarily that deductive argument have to move from a general premise to a particular conclusion. It can move from a general to a general, it can move from a particular to a particular. And I've given an example of a particular to a particular. Now I want to give an example from a general to a general. For example, I say all bright students are hardworking people. are hardworking people. I say UNILAG students are hardworking people. Therefore, UNILAG students are bright students. So this is an example of a deductive argument whose premise moves from a general proposition and whose conclusion is also a general proposition. So we move from a general to a general and it's still deductive. Our conclusion here says UNILAG students are bright students. So our conclusion is necessarily derived from the premises given. All bright students are hardworking. So if all bright students are hardworking and all UNILAG students are hardworking, definitely all UNILAG students will be bright. So we deduce this our argument from the premises given. That's why it's called deductive, that we deduced it from the premises given. So it is not something that is out of what is given, all right? So this is an example of a deductive argument which moves from a general premise to a general conclusion. So the traditional way of defining defining deductive argument according to Aristotelian logic is not correct according to the modern logician, because a deductive argument can move from a general to a general and from a particular to a particular. So let's also take a look at inductive arguments. So inductive argument, same thing, according to classical Aristotelian logic, is an argument which moves from a particular premise to a general conclusion. All right, guys, I'm going to give an example of an inductive argument according to classical Aristotelian logic. So an example of an inductive argument according to Aristotelian logic goes like this. Let's take, for example, I say that Ijoma is an Igbo trader and a liar. And I say that Darasimi is a Yoruba trader and a liar. And the third one, let's say Adamu is an Hausa trader and a liar. So it will lead me to conclude that therefore, probably all traders are liars. Now, if you look at this example that I've given so far on the board, you see that it moved from a particular premise to a general conclusion. Ijoma is a Yoruba trader. Ijoma is an Igbo trader and a liar. It's a particular proposition which serves as the premise of this argument. So the conclusion is a general premise. It's a general proposition which serves as the conclusion. All traders are liars. So all traders are liars in this case is a general conclusion. So this is a classical example of an Aristotelian inductive logic. But the modern logicians are saying that that cannot be so, because we have an example of an inductive argument which starts from a general premise to a general conclusion. And we also have an inductive argument which also starts from a particular premise to a particular conclusion. But what we should look out for is if that argument provides a probable ground for accepting the conclusion of an argument. So the definition preferred or offered by modern logicians as regards inductive argument is that an inductive argument is an argument whose premises provide a probable ground for accepting the conclusion of an argument. So I'm giving an example of inductive arguments whose premises are from a particular premise to a general conclusion, from a particular premise to a particular conclusion, and from a general premise to a general conclusion. Let's take an example of this. So an example of an inductive argument whose premises move from a general premise to a particular conclusion is this. All pastors are powerful and arrogant. Powerful and arrogant. We have all presidents are powerful and arrogant. And we have all professors are powerful and arrogant. Therefore, probably all powerful people are arrogant. So if you look at this example, we find out that the premise is general. It starts with a general premise and it also ends with a general conclusion. This is an example of an inductive argument according to modern logicians. So it is not necessary that an inductive argument move from a particular to general, it can move from a general to general, as you can see in this example. So how does this entail an inductive argument? So we have few cases. All pastors are powerful and arrogant. All presidents are powerful and arrogant. All professors are powerful and arrogant. These are the three examples of powerful people. So based on these few instances, we now infer that all powerful people are arrogant. So this is probabilistic in nature. And by implication, inductive arguments are probabilistic in nature. So it does not entail certainty, it only entails probability. But deductive argument entails certainty, all right, because deductive argument, the conclusion is necessarily deduced from the premises given. So why inductive argument, the conclusion is not necessarily derived. So it is on a probable ground that we derive the conclusion of the argument based on the premises given in an inductive argument. So another example of an inductive argument that moves from a particular premise to a particular conclusion is this. Let's take this example so that we understand what an inductive argument really is. Let's say that Abacha is a military leader and a tyrant. Also, let's say that Ibrahim is a military leader. Let's use the word ruler instead of leader. Let's say Abacha is a military ruler and a tyrant, and then Ibrahim is a military ruler and what? A tyrant. Therefore, probably Buhari, a military leader, will also be a tyrant. So, if you check this, you see that it moves from a particular premise towards a particular conclusion. Abacha is a military leader and a tyrant, a particular proposition that serves as a premise. Ibrahim is a military ruler and a tyrant, a particular proposition that serves as a premise to also a particular proposition that serves at the conclusion of this argument. So you can see that an inductive argument does not necessarily have to move from a particular to a general as the classical Aristotelian logic holds it. But what we should look out for is if the premises of the argument provide a conclusive or a probable ground for accepting the conclusion of an argument. Okay, so an inductive argument entails probability, while a deductive argument entails certainty. So what you should look out for in an argument is if the premises provide a conclusive ground or a probable ground for accepting the conclusion of an argument. So if the premises in the argument provide a conclusive ground, know that that argument is a deductive argument. But if it provides a probable ground, know that that argument is an inductive argument. It does not necessarily have to move from a general premise to a particular conclusion for it to be a deductive, and it does not necessarily have to move from a particular premise to a general conclusion for it to be an inductive. So what you look at is the certainty and the probability in the premises of the argument. So having said that, it is worthy to know that an inductive argument, so let's start with a deductive argument. A deductive argument can either be valid or invalid. Why an inductive argument? Inductive argument can either be correct or incorrect. So the concept of validity applies to deductive argument. Concept of correctness and incorrectness applies to what? Inductive argument. So guys, we've come to the end of this session. Don't forget that we talked on types of argument. I said that we have two types of arguments, deductive argument and inductive argument. And we're able to look at those two arguments from the perspective of the Aristotelian logic and perspective of the modern logician. We're able to give an example on both the Aristotelian logic and on both the modern logician. So thank you guys, and don't forget that if you have any question on this, don't forget to drop your question on the comment section below. See you in our next tutorial section. Bye for now. Thank you.